A woman asked to speak to me about her life and asked me to offer some insight and direction. Now, to be clear, she was asking me for help, which is important to know in understanding my response to her. I don't normally offer insight and suggestions unsolicited, where I'd be intruding. She told me that she felt alone, lost, and confused. She had never experienced a successful relationship. She asked me, why do I feel like that? Why do my relationships always end? Because she said, I know that my parents were loving to me and have been all of my life. I responded immediately, impossible. It is. It's impossible. I said to her, children who are unconditionally loved with anything approaching consistency do not grow up feeling alone, lost, and confused. They don't. She continued to insist that her childhood had been loving. Now, keep in mind, she asked me to help her with her life, so I did. She insisted that her parents had been loving, which is very common. Why do people insist that their childhoods were loving? Lots of reasons, but here are the biggest three. Who wants to admit that their own parents didn't love them? 2, ignorance. If you've never been unconditionally loved, you wouldn't know whether you had been. How would you know? And you would tend to make the favorable assumption that you had been. Just ignorance. And betrayal, the third. Our parents told us that they loved us. So, if now we claim they didn't, we're labeling them liars and ourselves as traitors. That's a little heavy for most people. So rather than go back and forth with me saying, no, you weren't, and her saying, yes, I was, and you were, and that's kind of boring, I approached her in a different way. I said, can you recall a time in your childhood when your parents were angry or irritated or disappointed at you? And she said, well, sure. I mean, sure as in like almost every day. She said, but isn't that true in all families? And you know, it's not like it was many times a day, she said, which pretty much tells you it was every day. I said, we don't really need to talk about how often. 2 reasons that we didn't get sidetracked. She was pretty invested in defending herself, even though she had asked me for my observations. She didn't ask me to confirm hers. And second, kids remember a tiny fraction of the unloving events in their lives. Kind of a tender mercy, actually. In the absence of unconditional love, unloving events are just the air they breathe. So she wouldn't remember them, would she? Because they weren't really remarkable. It'd be like me asking you, so do you remember as a child at a time that you sat there breathing? Well, no, because it was normal. Same with unloving events with most people. So I continued. Just remember one or more of those times when they were irritated at you. Do you remember being afraid when they were angry? No, she said, quite sincerely. She believes it. And I said, I believe you. Pain and fear were the air she breathed. So a fearful moment would not have been remarkable or memorable to her. So I continued providing more opportunities for her to see her life accurately, which is what she wanted. I said, when they were irritated, did you like it? Let's make it even simpler. She said, well, she sensed she was being trapped. She said, well, no, I didn't like it. I said, now we're going to learn something important for you. Of course you didn't like their anger. And if you didn't like it, over here in this direction, the feeling wasn't any of the happy feelings, was it? So what feelings are left? Were you angry? She said, no. And I said, early as a child, probably not. Later, you were. Most feelings boil down to some interaction or version of mad, sad, glad, and afraid. Really, there's lists of hundreds of feelings, but it's usually, so look at those. Mad, probably not angry. Sad is kind of a sophisticated emotion, usually reserved for the loss of a thing. You weren't glad, so what's that leave? Afraid. The only one that fits here in the negative category is afraid. In other words, it's all that's left if you didn't like it. You were afraid. Not asking. You were. You may not remember it, but you still were. And that is the single feeling people mean most often when they say they don't like something or they're unhappy. Even anger is just a response to pain and fear. So, relax, I said to her. Can you see how if a parent who's 100 times bigger and stronger than a child is angry, the child might be afraid? Little child, great big parent standing above them saying, how could a child not be afraid? I mean, what animal in the forest isn't afraid of an animal 100 times bigger than it? She said, yeah, it kind of feels right, but I don't remember much of it. I'll bet you can't. Close your eyes and relax, I said. Think of a time in childhood when you were suddenly caught doing something that you knew was wrong. Now, it took a second, but she finally said, one night when I was little, I remember staying up late and playing in my room way later than my bedtime. Suddenly, my mom came into the room, and instantly I got afraid because she had caught me. I said, well, you're getting close. You were afraid, but not just of getting caught. When children feel unconditional love, because I've seen this over and over, they don't get afraid when they're caught. Why would they? What bad thing can happen if you feel loved by the person seeing your mistake? You wouldn't. In fact, I've caught a child making a mistake, and they just look at me and go, I probably shouldn't be doing this. They're not afraid. So what were you afraid of? Because you were. She said, well, I wasn't afraid that she didn't love me. She's still kind of stuck on that. Because I know she loves me. Stuck twice. She doesn't want to be a traitor. But I was afraid that I had done something wrong. No, kids aren't that sophisticated. They don't go, I became afraid that my behavior was not consistent with the overall fabric of the universe. I had done something that was not consistent with true principles. That doesn't make a child afraid. They don't care just about the mistake. And kids who feel loved really don't care if they make a mistake, which proves that you didn't know what unconditional love even felt like. You didn't know what it would have been like to make a mistake and not be afraid of doing something wrong. I continued. Imagine you have $20 million and you know it's yours. Then somebody comes and takes $10 emotionally, just like somebody being angry with you or you being caught being wrong. Would you be afraid? It'd be ridiculous. $10 wouldn't even be pocket change. So when your mother caught you, you were not sure that you had $20 million. You were not sure that you were loved without condition. She said, well, no, I wasn't afraid she didn't love me. She's pretty stubborn about this. I was just afraid I'd done something wrong or that I would get a consequence. If you were certain that she loved you unconditionally, which is the only kind that counts, you'd have $20 million. Doing something wrong would have meant nothing to you. It would matter zero. Nor would you be afraid of getting a consequence. You might not like the consequence. You'd go, yeah, okay, I've got to go to bed, and maybe I'll have to go to bed 15 minutes early the next day. But there would be no fear, and you were afraid. It's hard for you to wrap your head around this because this is new. But the truth is, you were afraid she would withdraw her love. That's why kids get afraid, period. You somehow knew that she couldn't be angry and loving in the same moment. She quit arguing. Tears rolled down her face as she realized that she'd been afraid of not being loved her entire life. By her mom, by her dad, boyfriends, teachers, girlfriends, bosses, co-workers, everybody. And that realization came in, rolling in like a mountain setting on her head, which is why she was weeping. Why am I telling you this story about an adult when most of you are raising children younger than this? Because this woman I'm describing is your child years from now. We don't pay attention to that enough. I've talked about this subject before, but we don't pay attention to what's down the road from what we let go, what we don't address. What seems like a small moment of disapproval, disappointment, frustration, anger, whatever, right now, is actually one of uncounted hundreds, perhaps thousands of such moments in the life of a child, which creates an atmosphere of pain and fear that creates PCSD in our children. The child becomes so hypervigilant about avoiding more pain that their entire life becomes about avoiding pain. That's their goal, which is not living. That's surviving. Avoiding pain is why we use anger, victimhood, withdrawal, alcohol, cutting, video games, social media, and on and on. Our childhood pain, thousands of unrecognized events like the one that this woman remembered finally, is why we live angry. It's why we feel depressed. It's why we lash out at our partners and more. Every word you speak to a child, or facial expression used, or tone of voice, or posture, all of it communicates to your child how the world is. The whole world, not just you. And that determines how the child will respond to the world, usually for life. Everything you do with your child moves him or her closer to feeling loved and to being loving and responsible, or your action moves them away from these life-giving qualities. It's pretty binary. You move them toward happiness or you move them away. Everything, to really be blunt, everything we do brings life or death into the lives of our children. Yeah, it's that serious, not joking. Later in life, as adults, chronologically speaking, these kids are usually still children, still reacting to pain, real and perceived, rather than making genuine choices. How do I know? I've counseled thousands of them. PCSD, post-childhood stress disorder, is utterly crippling, and it's caused by unremarkable events like the one described by this adult woman, like the experiences your children get from you every day. This isn't about this woman. This is about your child. As we learn to love and teach, we learn to avoid causing these wounds in our children in the first place. We allow them to be loving and responsible instead, which is the greatest success we'll ever have in our own lives. It's worth it.